20 years ago, Kelly and I lived immediately next door to the church I served. Like many churches, there was a sign with basic information about the place right on the front lawn. The sign's still there. It is about 6 feet across, about 4 feet high. It's made out of the same red brick the church is made out of. And then on the inside of it, there is one of those felt boards that you can put plastic letters on. 3-4 inch high letters. You could change them, but the church moves like a mighty turtle, and so we never changed the sign. It always said more or less the same thing. The church name, the worship time, and then my name, Matt Fitzgerald, pastor. Unremarkable, totally unremarkable, except that our neighbor directly across the street, the person who looked out the window, out the bay window of their living room, his living room, and saw this sign virtually every time he looked out the window, he always called me Mark. I never knew what to do about this. In fairness, I don't remember his name, but it wasn't displayed in an 84-point font outside my living room window every day for 8 years. I never know what to do when somebody calls me by the wrong name. That moment always stymies me. What do? It seems like you can ignore it, or you can come across as prickly and shaming. I'm not Mark, though, and it feels bad somehow to be called the wrong name. I usually let it slide. If it happens the second time, I try to be low-key with the correction. And I know how to do this graciously, how to graciously correct someone when they call me by the wrong name, because you have taught me how to do so. Almost every week I get someone's name wrong in the handshake line, and people are always gracious about it. You're always kind about it. I get most people's names right, most of them, but that doesn't really matter to Barbara when I call her Brenda, the fact that I've gotten the 95 names in front of her correct. Years ago, I led 3 funerals on the same weekend. At the third one, I was beginning to feel a little sleepy, a little woozy, and I called the deceased Walter, which would have been fine except the man's name was James. James was a lovely, elderly gentleman who suffered some kind of neurological disturbance in his late 70s and became mute. He died 6 years later, and I didn't meet him until after he stopped talking, and I never heard him speak. I often saw him smile, never heard him speak. James reminded me of a client that I'd had while working as a caretaker for disabled adults, Walter Schmidt. That's why I called him Walter. Afterward, I told the organist, I can't believe I called James Walter. And he said, oh, I didn't think it was a big deal until the third time you did it. There's something doubly offensive about mistaking someone's name in worship. The church certainly isn't God, but when we mess up that badly liturgically, we risk creating the impression that God doesn't know the difference between Walter and James, or that God doesn't care about the difference between Walter and James. And that couldn't be further from the truth. God knows your name. He formed you. She knit you together. She knows your thoughts from afar. God knows your name. She loves you. You are precious in her sight. More than this, she lays her hand upon you. He knows your thoughts before you think them, knows what you're going to say before you even speak the words. Listen, you can take the wings of the morning and fly to the furthest limits of the sea, and you will not be able to flee God. He'll be there waiting for you. He hems you in behind and before. There is no escaping. My God, why won't you forsake me? My God, Why won't you leave me alone? That's in this psalm. God knows your name. And no doubt there are some days when we wish God didn't. When someone knows your name, they have a certain claim on you, right? Matthew John Fitzgerald. Say those words in the right tone of voice, and I guarantee you I will snap to attention. Matthew John Fitzgerald. Stomach drops, blood pressure goes up. What did I do this time? God knows your name. And that is unsettling. Because, of course, we know that in ways large and small, gross and refined, obvious and complicated, we're guilty. Maybe I'd rather remain anonymous in God's sight. That's where our thoughts start going whenever we think about judgment. When I was in 7th grade, I lived near a kid named Willie Wilson. We know that name, Willie Wilson, of course, because of the mayoral candidate and businessman, and the fact that most of us have seen it on lawn signs multiple times or read the name in the paper. It can sort of inure us to the fact that Willie Wilson is a great name. It's kind of silly and joyful. What I know is that when you apply it to a 70-pound, skinny, little 13-year-old kid, it becomes a bit ridiculous. Willie Wilson. This was way before the internet when I was in 7th grade, and if Miami Vice was not on television, there really wasn't very much to do at all. But in the fall, all through our neighborhood, apples grew. And we would do something really bad. And Willie Wilson was the ringleader of this game. What we'd do is throw apples at cars. We didn't hit them very often, but we'd throw apples at cars. And you could actually take 2 of these little apples and have them in your hand at the same time. One in reserve, one to throw. And you could throw one and then immediately throw the other. Or immediately across the house, across the street from my mother's house, there was another house up on a cliff, and they had 4 apple trees in their front yard. And beneath the cliff, there was a road with the kind of evil-sounding name, Snively Road. You could go up to the top of this cliff across the street from our house and rain apples down on cars. So, one Friday night in the fall, Willie Wilson and my friend John and I went up there to do this. At this point in my life, I had never actually hit a car with an apple. But there we were, and a car went by, and all 3 of us, with the double motion, hit that car. Bam, 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 bam. 3 little Cy Young winners right there. It was kind of a miracle. And we couldn't believe it, and we were so excited. And the car, instead of stopping, the guy hit the gas. And we thought we were away scot-free. We sat up there on top of that cliff rejoicing until all of a sudden you could hear the engine of this giant Buick roaring up that hill. He knew exactly where we were, and there was no place to go. An enraged motorist, 3 little kids, a cliff. So what we did is we ran in different directions. It seems like a good strategy, right? We just took off. And as I was hiding in a shrub, I saw this guy, and it was frightening how angry he was. And I didn't really understand until years later when I was driving. Somebody hit my car with a snowball, right? Recompense. It's alarming when that happens to you. So the man's anger was understandable. But he caught Willie, and he lifted him up. It was like something right out of a movie. He lifted him up in the air, and he said, "Tell me your name." "Willie Wilson." And he started shaking him, and he said, "Quit messing around, kid. Tell me your real name." "Willie Wilson, I swear, it's Willie Wilson." God knows your name. Maybe we'd rather remain anonymous when judgment comes. That's what that enraged man thought. Why would this kid tell me his real name? What kind of name is Willie Wilson? This kid must be lying. But we can't lie to God. He knows your name. Thank God he knows your name. Martin Heidegger famously taught that to exist, is to experience a sense of having been thrown into existence. Picture a red rubber ball thrown with force up into the air, out over a park or out over a city street. The ball doesn't know where it will land, what it might hit, how long it will be in the air, who threw it, why it was thrown. It might not even know that it's a ball. All it knows is this unsettling sense of hurtling through time. Heidegger says that's you. That's me. That's what it is to exist. And I think there's great truth there. Except for the fact that the philosopher doesn't get at or acknowledge the most basic thing about being human, which is that we were made by God, knit together, crafted, created. And so if we do experience life as thrownness, we also exist being caught by God, landing in the palm of her outstretched hand, being caught gently. That's what happens. She catches you. She stands you on firm ground. She calls you by name. God knows your name. To hear your name spoken out loud and clearly by another human being is somehow to hear an echo of such security. You know that old Talking Heads song, Once in a Lifetime? You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? That is thrownness. That is how we experience life until God catches us, until we hear our name spoken. And to hear your name spoken out loud, clearly, with care by another human being is somehow to hear an echo of the fact that God knows your name. Research into brain activation patterns show a very particular phenomenon that happens in your prefrontal cortex when you look in the mirror. You look in the mirror, and your mind moves to tell you, that is me. This is who I am. Here's something beautiful. That same brain pattern unfolds when you hear another person speak your name out loud. You need other people to know you in order to know who you are, in order to have a secure sense of self, in order to stand on the ground and be who you are. Last week, I found myself in another part of the world with a group from church. Many of you know this. We were in Haiti. So Wednesday of last week, I found myself standing on a rooftop with a 40-pound hammer drill, right? Both of these things are very foreign experiences to me. 40-pound hammer drill in my hand, overlooking a part of the city of Port-au-Prince, overlooking favelas built into the hillside, these little shacks made out of tin and rock with no running water, and up above them, some of the largest mansions that I've ever seen in my life, and right at my feet, surrounded all across this roof by the neighboring buildings, concertina wire, which seems to grow like weeds in Haiti. It was everywhere. And right next to Three Angels, the school and orphanage that we serve, there is this expat, ex-Marine, Haitian-American voodoo priest. That's what the missionaries told me, at least, what he was. And he would come out every once in a while and grab a couple of doves off his roof and then go back into his compound. And it was 95 degrees out. And that city is so loud. I thought the drunken young men coming home from the bars on Lincoln Avenue and incessantly playing on the swing set across the street from the parsonage were loud. They've got nothing on these folks in Haiti. So Haitian hip hop is just booming, and people are arguing and rejoicing and shouting, and there's 300 kids at the school downstairs, so much noise, and I found myself sapped by the heat of the summer, as the psalmist says. Where am I? How did I get here? Who am I? And then a Three Angels employee, this wonderful Haitian man named Suve, climbed the ladder to join me on the roof. I said, hello. I said, bonjour. I learned how to do that. Bonjour. But I mispronounced his name. And I'd been mispronouncing his name all week long. I said, bonjour, sous vide. You know, the cooking method, right? We put a little piece of meat in a bag. One of the people that were staying at the guest house where we were was not one of the people from St. Paul's, but was, I'd say, a small talk challenged evangelical. And he had recently begun cooking in this method. So when there was a lull in the conversation, that's what he would revert to. Do you know about sous vide cooking? You know, yes, I do. You told me about it a little while ago. But the term was on my mind, sous vide. So I kept on saying the man's name wrong. Bonjour, sous vide. And he looked at me and he looked irritated and disappointed. And then he thumped himself on the chest. Sous vide. Sous vide. So I said it back, sous vide. And he smiled at me, and then he pointed at me with a question in his eyes. And I said, Matt. And he said, Matt. And in that instant, so far from all these things I know and all the people that I love, in such a strange place, doing such a strange thing, I felt secure, on solid ground. God knows your name. Amen.